Right now, your mind may be carrying a heavy, soot-stained weight that you have been trying to keep hidden behind a perfectly polished exterior. You are likely feeling the dull, internal density of emotions you have deemed unworthy, the lingering frustration, the quiet envy, or the sharp self-doubt that you feel forced to suppress in order to be seen as stable or lighthearted. You move through your days wearing a mask of composure, yet underneath that surface, there is an entire forge of unexpressed reactions, bubbling and cooling into hard, jagged shapes that settle in your chest and belly. You are lying in the semi-darkness, the air around you smelling faintly of crisp evening rain and the cooling earth, while the subtle texture of your bedding presses against your skin. You feel that if you were to truly look at these heavy parts of yourself, they might consume you, or worse, expose you as someone who is not yet whole. But you are not broken, and the density you feel is not a failure of character. It is simply the raw, unrefined material of your own human experience that has been sitting too long in the dark. What you are feeling is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a signal that your inner world is ready for a different kind of attention. Tonight, we will not force the mind to be silent, nor will we try to polish your personality until the dark parts vanish. We will learn how to approach the forge of your own heart with the steady, patient hands of someone who understands that the heat of awareness is the only thing capable of changing the weight of the past. The mind does not become luminous because you hide the leaden parts of yourself. It becomes luminous when you realize that your deepest wisdom is actually forged within the heat of your own shadow. You might have been taught that peace is found by choosing only the light, by rejecting the envy, the sorrow, or the heavy self-criticism. But the surprising truth is that when you push away the dense base emotions, you are throwing away the very ore you need to create your own inner gold. You are safe enough to soften. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight. You do not have to reconcile every dark feeling or transform every heavy memory before the sun rises. Nothing is required of you in this space except the willingness to let the fire of your own presence touch the parts of you that have been sitting cold for too long. Imagine yourself standing before a stone forge carved deep into the mountainside. The air here is rich with the scent of charcoal and the faint, sharp tang of iron. The fire at the center is not a destructive force, it is a transformative one. You have been walking around this forge for years, carrying a heavy, blackened crucible filled with all the things you feel, you cannot say, cannot show, and cannot accept about yourself. You think that by hiding this crucible, you are protecting your peace. But the weight of it is what is pulling you down. The weight of it is what makes your sleep so fragmented. And the weight of it is what makes you feel like you are perpetually acting, perpetually performing, rather than simply living. Take a slow, unhurried breath, and let it travel all the way down to your feet. Notice how the breath moves, how it has its own texture, its own temperature. It does not demand that you be anything other than a person who is breathing in the same way. The heat of your awareness can gently permeate the dense, heavy feelings you have been harboring. You do not need to command the feelings to change. You do not need to force them to become positive or enlightened. You only need to place them, with a compassionate hand, into the warmth of your own observation. Perhaps you have felt this density before, that sensation of being not enough or too much, of being trapped in a loop where your own emotions feel like an enemy to your tranquility. Maybe you have even felt a subtle sense of shame for having these feelings at all, believing that a truly good person would never struggle with bitterness or insecurity or the heavy ache of unspoken grief. That belief is the main barrier to your rest. It is the insistence that the forge must only contain precious metal, and that everything else is merely trash to be buried. But in this quiet, mountain-bound space, we can admit that the lead is just as much a part of you as the gold. Without the lead, there is no substance. Without the base metal, there is no weight, no grounding, no durability. If it feels right, notice where you are holding that density tonight. Is it a tightness in the center of your chest, a feeling of being pulled inward? Is it a sluggish, cold sensation in your limbs? Do not try to push it away. Do not try to analyze why it is there or how long it has been sitting in your crucible. Just notice the weight of it. Give it the dignity of your attention. You are not a spectator in your own life who is observing a ruin. You are the forge keeper, the one who understands that even the coldest, heaviest material can be moved if it is held in the right kind of heat. You do not need to do anything with this heaviness tonight. You do not need to forge it into a miracle or solve the puzzle of why you are feeling this way. You only need to set the crucible down for a moment. You only need to step away from the anvil and realize that the fire is already burning. Your awareness is the fire. Your breath is the bellows. Your presence is the fuel. Everything you need for the transmutation of your own heart is already here, embedded in the very structure of your being. You have spent so long running from the forge, terrified of the heat and the soot, that you have forgotten that the transformation of your own shadow is the most natural thing in the world. As you lie here, feel the boundary of your body against the quiet, dark room. Notice the cooling air on your skin. Everything is settling. The frantic external pace of the day is falling away, leaving only the reality of the present moment. You are not required to be a finished product. You are allowed to be a work in progress, a collection of raw materials that are slowly, patiently finding their way into a new alignment. The fact that you are here, willing to sit in the dark with your own complexity, is proof of your resilience. It is proof that you have a core of quiet strength that can handle whatever lead you have gathered. We will soon walk through the story of an apprentice who nearly ruined his own life by trying to filter out all the base metals of his heart, only to discover that the gold he sought was hidden within the very things he was discarding. But for now, just rest in the permission to be complex. Rest in the knowledge that your shadow does not disqualify you from the light. It creates the depth that allows the light to have meaning. You have done enough for today. The mask can be set aside. The performance is over. The mountain air is cooling. The forge is glowing with a steady, amber light, and you are entirely safe to sink into the quiet, dark earth of your own restoration. If your mind begins to cycle through old anxieties, if it tries to remind you of the correct way to feel, or tells you that you are foolish for wanting to sit with your shadow, just observe the thought, as you would a stray spark drifting toward the rafters. It is a thought. It is a spark. It is not the forge. It is not the fire. You remain the one who watches, the one who breathes, and the one who knows that tonight there is no demand to be anything other than exactly who you are, in all your heavy, beautiful, unrefined reality. Deep in the jagged shadows of the ironwood ridge, where the air hangs thick with the scent of charcoal and ancient stone, there stood a forge that had been cold for a generation. It was a place of heavy spirits, tucked into the hollow of a volcanic slope, surrounded by the remnants of a life that felt like a series of unfinished tasks. Here lived Kalen, an apprentice who had inherited nothing but a pile of blackened scrap metal and a heavy, iron crucible that looked as though it had seen 1,000 fires. Kalen was a man obsessed with clarity. He had convinced himself that if he could only find the purest, most refined ore, he could forge a tool so flawless it would finally make his own life feel purposeful. He spent his days scavenging the mountain slopes, ignoring the smooth, gray river stones and the vibrant moss, searching only for the heavy, dark, unrefined lead ore. He believed this lead was the source of his struggle. He believed that if he could just force it through the forge of his ambition, if he could just heat it enough, strike it often enough, and discard enough of the dross, he would be left with a purity that would finally silence his inner critic. He wanted to feel light. He wanted to feel untarnished. So he worked in a state of perpetual gritted-teeth vigilance, his brow constantly furrowed, his hands calloused and stained with the black soot of his own unexpressed frustrations. One evening, as the sky turned the color of a bruised plum, a master smith came walking down the mountain trail. He was not a man of refined manners. His apron was torn, and his boots were heavy with the red dust of the lower valleys. He stopped at the entrance of Kalen's forge, watching the young man work. Kalen was striking a cooling piece of metal, his hammer hitting the anvil with a rhythmic, desperate clang that echoed against the silent cliffs. He was trying to shape a simple wedge, but his hand was shaking, and the iron was cooling too fast to bend. He was angry. He was disgusted with himself for not being faster, for not being stronger, for not having the refined metal he thought he deserved. The master smith stepped into the forge, the heat hitting him like a physical presence. He didn't say a word. He walked over to the workbench, picked up a discarded, heavy piece of lead ore that Kalen had tossed aside in disgust earlier that day, and placed it directly into the center of the cooling forge fire. Kalen stopped his hammer midair. "That is waste," Kalen said, his voice brittle. "I spent all morning trying to refine it. It is too heavy. It is too cold. It does not hold the shape of anything useful. I am throwing it away because it will never be gold." The old master didn't look at him. He simply began to work the bellows, his movements slow and steady, bringing the fire back to a deep, molten orange glow. He didn't try to add more fuel. He didn't try to strike the metal. He just let the heat envelop the dark, stubborn lump of lead. "You think the lead is the problem," the master said, his voice low and vibrating, as if he were speaking to the fire itself. "You think the density is a defect. You are trying to build a sword of light by discarding the very metal that gives the blade its weight." "It isn't light," Kalen retorted, his heart drumming against his ribs. "It is just heavy. It just sits there, dull and dark. How can I feel clean? How can I feel gold if I am constantly surrounded by this? It makes me feel slow. It makes me feel stagnant." The master smith stopped the bellows. He waited until the fire died down to a dull, pulsing ember. And then he reached in with his long tongs. He pulled out the lead. It had not melted into gold. It had not vanished into thin air. It was now a soft, glowing, malleable mass, its edges rounded, its density no longer a weapon against the anvil, but a source of gentle, contained heat. He placed it onto the workbench in front of Kalen. "Touch it," the master said. Kalen hesitated. He was so used to metal that was either biting cold or searingly sharp. He reached out, expecting the burn, expecting the harshness. But when he touched the lead, he felt something else. He felt the latent heat, a steady, deep, resonant warmth that stayed in his palm long after he pulled his hand away. "You have been trying to forge gold by discarding everything that felt heavy," the master said, looking around the soot-blackened shop. "You have been trying to be the light of the mountain, while fearing the mountain's own foundations. The lead is not your enemy, Kalen. The lead is your ballast. If you try to forge a life that is only light, you will have no weight. You will be tossed about by the first wind that blows through this pass. You are not meant to discard the heavy parts of your heart. You are meant to sit with them in the fire until they are warm enough to hold." Kalen looked at the metal, then at his own stained, shaking hands. For the first time, he didn't feel the urge to strike. He didn't feel the urge to push the metal into a shape that wasn't there. He felt the heaviness of his own emotions, the frustration he had been masking, the envy he had been burying, the exhaustion of the persona he had been maintaining. And instead of seeing them as trash, instead of seeing them as the reason he wasn't perfect, he began to see them as the raw material of his own presence. The master smith stood there, leaning against the cold stone of the wall, his presence a quiet, immovable anchor in the middle of the forge. He didn't offer a lecture on the nature of the mind. He didn't give a sermon on the virtues of acceptance. He just stood there, letting the silence between them expand, allowing the truth of the warm lead to settle into Kalen's awareness. Kalen breathed in, the smell of sulfur and charcoal no longer an irritant, but a reminder of the process he was currently in. He realized then that his struggle wasn't against the lead. It was against the idea that the forge should be empty. He had been trying to create a vacuum, thinking that a clean shop was a sign of a clean soul. But the shop was meant to be lived in. The forge was meant to be used. And he, the apprentice, was meant to be the one who stood in the middle of it. Not as a worker fighting the metal, but as a smith who knew the value of the weight. He didn't finish the wedge that night. He didn't polish the floor or hide the scrap metal. He simply blew out the final lamp and walked to the edge of the forge, looking out into the vast, dark expanse of the mountain. He felt the density of his own heart, the fatigue, the lingering questions, the unresolved weight, but he no longer felt the desperate need to run from it. He felt it as a part of the mountain. He felt it as a part of the fire. And as he sat down in the quiet, for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a broken tool. He felt like the forge itself, holding the warmth, holding the weight, and waiting, with a slow and steady patience, for whatever the night would bring. He was not yet gold, he was not yet light, but he was warm. And in the middle of the jagged, shadowed ridge, that warmth was enough to keep the darkness from feeling so hollow. You are standing in that same forge tonight, listening to the cooling metal, and perhaps you are realizing that the very parts of yourself you have tried to bury, the heavy, dark, unrefined pieces, are not the problem. They are the ballast. They are the ground. They are the warmth that is waiting to be integrated. You are the smith, the forge, and the metal all at once. And tonight you are finally allowed to stop striking the anvil, to stop demanding that the lead become something it is not, and to simply let the warmth of your own presence settle into the weight of your own life. The warmth that lingered in Kalen's palm after he touched the lead was not a magical transformation. It was simply the heat that had always been present, waiting to be acknowledged. You have spent so much of your life trying to refine your own heart, sifting through your experiences like a smith who fears the soot, that you have forgotten the forge is not meant to be a sterile room. It is a place of labor, of heat, of transformation. When we try to reach for a sense of gold, for that elusive feeling of lightness or worthiness or perfection, we often do so by casting aside the very parts of ourselves that feel heavy, dark, or unresolved. We treat our own shadow like industrial waste, something to be discarded so we can finally be the person we think we need to be. This story is not suggesting that you stop feeling, or that you force yourself to love the parts of your life that bring you pain. It is not asking you to become cold or indifferent to the difficulties you face. It is showing us something much quieter, and in the end, much more sustainable. The suffering Kalen experienced was not truly in the lead ore itself. It was in the way he held it. It was in the desperate, grinding resistance he brought to his own work, the way he looked at a piece of metal and decided it was an enemy because it didn't match the image of the sword of light he had built in his mind. The suffering wasn't just the hardness of the metal, it was the hardness of his own judgment. When we talk about the idea of a second wound, this is precisely what we mean. The first wound is the reality of being human, the heavy emotions that arise when we lose what we love, when we feel inadequate, or when we see parts of ourselves that don't fit into the polite, polished narrative we present to the world. That heavy feeling is just life. It is the raw material. But the second wound is the layer we add on top. The shame for having those feelings, the critique that says we shouldn't be struggling, and the exhausting attempt to hide that struggle from ourselves and others. That layer is where the real exhaustion begins. That layer is the overwinding of the heart. Buddhist wisdom helps us stop feeding that second wound. It doesn't promise to remove the first wound. It doesn't offer a path where you will never again feel envy or anger or the crushing weight of self-doubt. Instead, it offers you a different relationship with those feelings. It teaches you that you can hold the lead of your life without being defined by it. You can acknowledge that you are feeling heavy or dark or unresolved, and you can hold that feeling in the warmth of your own awareness, just as the master smith held the ore in the fire. You don't have to turn it into gold instantly. You don't have to strike it against the anvil until it breaks. You only have to let it be held by a mind that is no longer in a hurry to get rid of it. Think of the emotions you've been hiding, the ones you've put into your own iron crucible, tucked away where you hope no one can see them. We often believe that these emotions are evidence of our failure. We think that a truly wise or peaceful person would have transcended such things, but that is the great paradox of the path. The wisdom you seek is not found by transcending your humanity, it is found by deeply, fully entering it. Your envy, your frustration, your sense of being left behind, these are not failures. They are the heavy, dense, and essential elements of your specific life. They carry your history, your vulnerabilities, and your capacity to care. If you were to somehow excise them, you would lose the weight that keeps you anchored. You would lose the depth that allows you to understand the suffering of others. The smith knew that if the blade were made of nothing but light, it would have no substance. It would be a ghost, a flicker, something that vanishes the moment it hits the resistance of the real world. Your shadow emotions provide the substance. When you stop fighting them, when you stop trying to smelt them away through the sheer force of your will, they begin to change. They don't disappear, but they lose their sharp, biting edges. They become like the lead in Kalen's palm, a source of warmth. You can carry them without being cut by them. You can live with them without feeling that you are being diminished by them. This requires a radical shift in how you view your own inner landscape. Most of the time, we treat our minds like a shop that must be kept clean, where every stray thought or dark impulse is a piece of trash to be swept out the door. But your mind is not a shop. It is a forge. It is a place of alchemy. It is the place where the raw, unrefined material of your days is being shaped into the capacity for empathy, for resilience, and for a kind of love that is strong enough to include even the parts of you that you've tried to reject. When you feel that heaviness, that dense, sluggish feeling of being not enough, try to notice that the heaviness itself is not the problem. The problem is the judgment that says, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Drop the judgment, and what are you left with? You are left with the sensation of weight. And weight is not an error. It is a property of matter. It is a property of your life. When you can sit with the weight, acknowledging it without wanting to change it, the second wound begins to heal. You aren't doing anything to the emotion, and yet, the emotional charge begins to lessen. The tightness in your throat, the knot in your stomach, these are just physical reflections of your resistance. When you yield to the reality of what is currently present, you create a space for the breath to enter. And in that space, there is a release that no amount of forced positivity could ever produce. You have probably spent years trying to polish your life to a high golden sheen, fearing that if anyone saw the soot on your hands, they would know you were an imposter. But what if the soot is the sign of the work? What if the struggle is not the absence of the path, but the path itself? The apprentice Kalen was afraid to be seen with the lead, but the master knew the lead was the key to the apprentice's own stability. You have been carrying your struggle like a burden, but it is actually your foundation. You are allowed to be tired of the performance. You are allowed to be tired of the need to be consistently up, consistently bright, consistently together. The night does not care if your shop is clean. The night only cares if you are warm, and you are warm. Even now, in the middle of your fatigue, there is a core of awareness that is not tired. There is a witness inside you that is not affected by the lead of your day. It is the witness that noticed you were feeling heavy. It is the witness that brought you to this space of rest. That witness is not struggling with the lead. It is not judging the soot. It is simply watching, simply holding, and simply allowing the forge to be what it is. That witness is who you are. The rest, the stories of your failure, the projections of your future, the heavy emotions you've been lugging around, that is just the material. You don't have to clean the material. You just have to learn how to keep the fire lit. If the mind begins to complain, if it says that this is lazy, or too simple, or that it won't actually solve your problems, listen to that thought. But don't give it the winding key. It's just another piece of raw ore, another fragment of your history, trying to dictate the rhythm of the forge. Acknowledge it, name it, and let it sit in the heat. It doesn't need to be destroyed, it just needs to be seen. You are the fire, you are the warmth, and you are perfectly, profoundly allowed to rest in the middle of your own complexity, without having to refine a single thing before you close your eyes. If it feels right, let your hands rest openly against the fabric of your bed, palms facing upward, as if you are finally placing the heavy, soot-stained crucible aside. There is no need to make your hands look a certain way, only to notice that they no longer have to grasp at the iron handles of your own internal forge. Let your fingers uncurl. Feel the space that opens in your palms when the internal pressure of holding yourself together is allowed to drift away. This is not a formal posture of meditation. It is simply the natural shape of a hand that has stopped trying to control the heat. Bring your attention to your breathing, not to command the rhythm, but to observe it as the bellows that bring life to your own inner forge. You do not need to pull the breath in, nor do you need to push it out. It moves through you like a rhythmic, cooling draft, back and forth, quiet and steady. Notice the way the air flows across your lips into the lungs, and then out again, a cycle that requires absolutely nothing from you. You are the space where this cycle happens. You are the forge that remains steady while the breath does its work. If a thought about tomorrow appears, a list of things you believe you must finalize, a memory of a moment where you felt you were not enough, see it for what it is. A piece of dense, cold ore. Do not try to catch it. Do not try to force it into a shape. Just name it silently to yourself, you might say. That is a thought about the future. or that is a feeling of inadequacy. Naming it is like looking at a lump of iron without trying to strike it. It is enough to know it is there. Perhaps you can imagine your mind as that stone forge high in the mountains. The chamber is warm, dim, and filled with the scent of charcoal and cooling earth. Outside, the winds of the world are howling, rushing to meet their deadlines. But inside, the furnace is at peace. Your worries, those jagged, heavy thoughts you feel you must constantly manage, can be visualized as individual pieces of raw metal scattered on the stone floor. You are not required to forge them. You are not required to smelt them into gold tonight. You can simply look at them, lying in the soft amber light of your awareness, acknowledging their texture, their density, their coolness, without the need to hammer them into a system. You are the forge keeper who has decided, just for this hour, to let the fire be enough. If you find that your mind is still darting toward the anvil, reaching for the heavy hammer of your own judgment, do not criticize yourself. That urge is just an old habit, a conditioned reflex from years of trying to refine your own humanity until it looked like perfection. When you notice the urge, acknowledge it with a gentle, inward nod. You could imagine yourself picking up that familiar, heavy hammer, feeling the weight of the steel, and then with a slow, deliberate movement, walking over to that quiet corner of the forge where the floor is covered in soft, cool dust. You do not need to throw it with force. Just let your fingers open. Watch as it rests on the floor, motionless, no longer capable of imposing its will upon your heart. The weight is gone from your hand. The mountain holds it now. Feel the muscles in your jaw as you do this. Often, we hold our anxiety there, as if we are biting down on the very metal we are trying to shape. Let your teeth part slightly. Let your tongue rest, heavy and soft, on the floor of your mouth. Note how the muscles of your neck and shoulders begin to slacken. Once you acknowledge that you do not have to hold the tension of the smith in your own body, you are not the hammer. You are not the anvil. You are the quiet presence that notices when the forge feels overheated and chooses to let it cool. If a particular concern keeps returning, a specific regret that feels like it might cause the forge to go dark, treat it with the same gentle curiosity. Instead of striking it, imagine it as a piece of iron lying on the workbench. It is just metal. It does not have the power to stop the rotation of the earth. It is not your life itself. See if you can. Just for a few moments, let it lie there exactly as it is, unformed, silent, perhaps a bit tarnished, without rushing to jam it into the fire. What happens when you grant yourself permission to let the metal be unrefined? Does the morning refuse to arrive? Does the mountain move, or does the night simply continue to breathe around you, steady and vast, entirely indifferent to your need for polish? There is no need to achieve a state of emptiness. Your mind may continue to produce thoughts, just as a mountain continues to produce mist. That is what minds do. The practice is not to stop the production, but to stop identifying with the product. You are the mountain, not the mist. You are the forge, not the iron. Even if your mind is busy, even if you feel you have failed to clear the space, simply noticing that your mind is busy is a moment of profound clarity. That noticing that silent, steady awareness is the forge keeper who has finally stopped trying to drive the transformation. If it helps, you might place a hand over your heart, feeling the steady, rhythmic beat beneath your ribs. This is the only fire you need tonight. The heart beats without your command. The blood flows without your guidance. The body repairs itself without your supervision. You are being lived by a wisdom far older than your conscious ambition. A wisdom that knows how to create life from the silence without ever feeling the need to hurry. Let your heartbeat be your metronome. Let the breath be the air that flows in and out, leaving the raw materials of your life exactly where they belong, ungathered, unforced, and completely at rest. You do not need to resolve the dilemmas of your life before you fall asleep. The problems will still be there in the morning, but you will meet them with a different heart. One that has tasted the coolness of the forge where the hammer now rests. For now there is only the descent into stillness. There is only the recognition that you have done enough for today. The forge is silent. The stone floor is cool. The valley outside is dark, and the mountain is holding you in its quiet embrace. You have earned the right to simply exist. You have earned the right to be a person who is not always analyzing, not always polishing, not always refining the ore. If you notice your mind beginning to reach for the hammer again, simply observe the movement. Do not struggle against the thought. Do not try to block it. Just notice the reaching. Recognize it as the echo of your own protective love, the part of you that wants to ensure you are safe, and offer it a moment of kindness. Thank the mind for its vigilance. Acknowledge that it was trying to help, and then gently, so gently, let the thought pass on through like a cloud moving across the face of a distant star. The star is not changed by the cloud. Your awareness is not changed by the thought. You remain steady and clear in the center of the night. Every time you return to the breath, you are choosing to come home to the present moment. You are choosing to set down the heavy tools of your own appraisal. You are choosing to trust that the day unfolds even when you are not driving it. This is the practice. It is not about reaching a destination. It is about the gentle, repeated act of letting go of the need to be the one who directs the transmutation. You are being held by the same life that weaves the seasons and turns the constellations. You are part of that movement, and you are entirely safe in it. The silence is growing deeper now. The space in the room feels wider, more open, as if the walls of the forge have fallen away, leaving only the soft, ambient sound of the night air. There is no urgency. There is no call to action. There is only the slow, rhythmic settling of your body into the warmth of your bed, and the quiet, steady permission to be exactly as you are, unfinished, unhurried, and perfectly at peace in the middle of your own life. In the quiet that follows, stay with that sensation of open hands, of empty palms, and of the heavy hammer resting on the cold floor, where it no longer has the power to pull at your spirit. You have let go, and in that letting go, you have finally found the space to simply breathe. In a high valley where the winters were long and the silence felt absolute, there lived a student named Iwan. He was a master of detail, known for weaving tapestries so precise they looked like paintings. Yet Iwan lived in constant quiet agony. He was haunted by the memory of a great tapestry. He had once attempted a complex, ambitious design, meant to honor his family's lineage, which had been ruined mid-process by a sudden violent storm that flooded his workshop and left the threads tangled, stained, and frayed beyond repair. He had abandoned the project, but he could not abandon the thought of it. Every night, his mind would return to the image of the ruined loom, replaying the moment the water broke through the door. He felt that until he could somehow account for that failure, until he could weave a new piece that surpassed the beauty of the lost one, his life was incomplete. He lived in the shadow of the local monastery, where a teacher known only as the master of the unfinished sat by a small, slow-burning hearth. Iwan often visited, not to ask for wisdom, but to seek a way to fix the past. He would sit near the teacher, his mind busy with calculations, constantly rearranging the threads of his memory, trying to find a configuration that would make the ruin of his past tapestry make sense. He was looking for a reason, a justification, or perhaps a way to reweave the history he could not change. One afternoon, the master stood up and walked to a large, heavy chest near the wall. He beckoned for Iwan to help him. Together they pried open the heavy, rusted iron lid. Inside, there was no gold, no silk, no treasure. The chest was filled with hundreds of pieces of broken, discarded clay shards of pottery, cracked roof tiles, and jagged bits of stone. The master reached in and pulled out a jagged, stained piece of a heavy clay vessel. He handed it to Iwan. It was cold, sharp, and utterly useless. "This is the history of the kiln," the master said, his voice as dry as the clay itself. "It was once part of a perfect water jar. Then the fire inside became too hot, it shattered. The potter didn't weep over the pieces. He didn't try to glue them back together into the shape of a jar. He simply accepted that the jar had fulfilled its purpose by breaking." Iwan looked at the shard. His heart felt the familiar, sharp pull of the weaver who sees a broken thread. But it's ruined, Iwan insisted, his voice tight. "It was meant to hold water. Now it holds nothing. How can a thing be purposeful if it fails its intended form?" The master did not answer with words. He took the shard back, walked to the hearth, and placed it near the flames, not to heat it, but to let it be warmed by the ambient glow. He then picked up a small, blunt wooden chisel and a mallet. "The failure isn't in the breaking, Iwan. The failure is in your refusal to let the broken piece become something else." He sat down and began to tap at the shard, not to shape it, but to gently chip away the sharp, dangerous edges. He worked with a slow, hypnotic focus. Ewan watched, his breath caught in his throat. He expected the master to try to rebuild the jar. He expected him to try to force the piece into a new, improved shape. But the master was only making the edges soft. He was taking the jagged, biting part of the shard and turning it into something that could be held without cutting the skin. You have been carrying the memory of your ruined loom like a shard of glass in your heart, the teacher said, not looking up. Every day, you pick it up, and every day it cuts you. You believe that by keeping the memory sharp, you are somehow honoring the loss. You think that if you stop bleeding, you are forgetting. But look at this piece now. The master held it out. The sharp, painful edge was gone, replaced by a smooth, rounded surface. It was still a broken piece of clay, but it no longer possessed the power to harm the one who held it. You cannot reweave the storm, the master continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. The rain fell. The workshop flooded. The threads were lost. That is the history of the clay. But you are not the storm, and you are not the ruins. You are the one who has been holding on to the broken pieces, wondering why your hands are bleeding. Ewan felt a strange, terrifying stillness wash over him. For years he had been convinced that his suffering was a form of loyalty to the life he had lost. If he stopped hurting, he felt he would be betraying the beauty of what he had once dreamed of creating. But as he looked at the smooth shard in the master's palm, he realized that his loyalty was only creating more waste. He was not protecting the past, he was preventing the present from existing. The master stood up and walked to the door of the hut, opening it wide to the snowy landscape. The wind whipped in, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. The weaver must eventually step away from the loom, the teacher said. You have been living in the room where the flood happened, but the flood is over. The water dried up long ago. The only thing still drowning in that room is your own heart. Ewan stepped outside into the biting cold. He stood there for a long time, the snow settling on his shoulders. He felt the weight of his identity, the identity of the weaver who had failed, the man whose life was defined by a single disaster. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, he did not try to weave a new story. He did not try to justify the past or plan for a future victory. He simply felt the cold, the silence, and the vast, indifferent beauty of the mountain night. He turned back to the hut. The master was already sitting by the hearth, the shard lying on the dirt floor. Forgotten, Ewan sat down. He didn't pick up the shard. He didn't try to fix the master's work. He just breathed. He felt the tightness in his chest, the habitual, frantic desire to fix, to change, to adjust, and he did not fight it. He let it be tight. He let it be uncomfortable. He didn't ask it to go away. He simply watched it, as if it were a weather pattern passing over the peaks of the distant mountains. In that moment, the transformation occurred. It wasn't a sudden burst of light or a permanent erasure of his grief. It was the simple, profound act of stopping the internal struggle against his own history. He stopped trying to make the storm into anything other than a storm. He stopped trying to make his failure into anything other than a failure. He realized that the failure was not a definition, it was a transition. It was the breaking of the jar that allowed the clay to be reformed. He stayed there until the fire burned low, his hands resting on his knees, open and empty. When he eventually rose to leave, he walked past the chest of broken shards without a second glance. He no longer needed to hide them, and he no longer needed to carry them. The past was exactly where it belonged, in the history of the kiln. He walked out into the night, and though he still felt the sadness of the loss, he felt it in the same way one feels the cold wind, as a part of the world, not as a hole inside himself. You are sitting in that same room now, in the stillness that follows the realization. Perhaps you have been carrying your own shards, the memories of things that didn't go as planned, the losses you haven't yet forgiven, the projects or the lives that feel like they ended in a flood. You have been clutching them so tightly that you have forgotten what it feels like to have open hands. Tonight, you are invited to set the shards down. You do not need to resolve the past. You do not need to turn your failures into something else. You only need to stop gripping the jagged edges. Let them be what they are. Let the history remain the history. And let your heart finally be allowed to rest, unburdened by the weight of things that are already gone. The room is quiet. The fire is embers, and the only thing required of you is to allow the silence to hold you, just as the earth holds the mountain. steady, ancient, and completely at peace. The warmth that lingered in Kalen's palm after he touched the lead was not a magical transformation. It was simply the heat that had always been present, waiting to be acknowledged. You have spent so much of your life trying to refine your own heart, sifting through your experiences like a smith who fears the soot, that you have forgotten the forge is not meant to be a sterile room. It is a place of labor, of heat, of transformation. When we try to reach for a sense of gold, for that elusive feeling of lightness, or worthiness, or perfection, we often do so by casting aside the very parts of ourselves that feel heavy, dark, or unresolved. We treat our own shadow like industrial waste, something to be discarded so we can finally be the person we think we need to be. This story is not suggesting that you stop feeling, or that you force yourself to love the parts of your life that bring you pain. It is not asking you to become cold or indifferent to the difficulties you face. It is showing us something much quieter and, in the end, much more sustainable. The suffering Kalen experienced was not truly in the lead ore itself. It was in the way he held it. It was in the desperate, grinding resistance he brought to his own work, the way he looked at a piece of metal and decided it was an enemy because it didn't match the image of the sword of light he had built in his mind. The suffering wasn't just the hardness of the metal, it was the hardness of his own judgment. When we talk about the idea of a second wound, this is precisely what we mean. The first wound is the reality of being human, the heavy emotions that arise when we lose what we love, when we feel inadequate, or when we see parts of ourselves that don't fit into the polite, polished narrative we present to the world. That heavy feeling is just life. It is the raw material. But the second wound is the layer we add on top. The shame for having those feelings, the critique that says we shouldn't be struggling, and the exhausting attempt to hide that struggle from ourselves and others. That layer is where the real exhaustion begins. That layer is the overwinding of the heart. Buddhist wisdom helps us stop feeding that second wound. It doesn't promise to remove the first wound. It doesn't offer a path where you will never again feel envy, or anger, or the crushing weight of self-doubt. Instead, it offers you a different relationship with those feelings. It teaches you that you can hold the lead of your life without being defined by it. You can acknowledge that you are feeling heavy, or dark, or unresolved, and you can hold that feeling in the warmth of your own awareness, just as the master smith held the ore in the fire. You don't have to turn it into gold instantly. You don't have to strike it against the anvil until it breaks. You only have to let it be held by a mind that is no longer in a hurry to get rid of it. Think of the emotions you've been hiding, the ones you've put into your own iron crucible, tucked away where you hope no one can see them. We often believe that these emotions are evidence of our failure. We think that a truly wise or peaceful person would have transcended such things. But that is the great paradox of the path. The wisdom you seek is not found by transcending your humanity, it is found by deeply, fully entering it. Your envy, your frustration, your sense of being left behind, these are not failures. They are the heavy, dense, and essential elements of your specific life. They carry your history, your vulnerabilities, and your capacity to care. If you were to somehow excise them, you would lose the weight that keeps you anchored. You would lose the depth that allows you to understand the suffering of others. The smith knew that if the blade were made of nothing but light, it would have no substance. It would be a ghost, a flicker, something that vanishes the moment it hits the resistance of the real world. Your shadow emotions provide the substance. When you stop fighting them, when you stop trying to smelt them away through the sheer force of your will, they begin to change. They don't disappear, but they lose their sharp, biting edges. They become, like the lead in Kalen's palm, a source of warmth. You can carry them without being cut by them. You can live with them without feeling that you are being diminished by them. This requires a radical shift in how you view your own inner landscape. Most of the time, we treat our minds like a shop that must be kept clean, where every stray thought or dark impulse is a piece of trash to be swept out the door. But your mind is not a shop. It is a forge. It is a place of alchemy. It is the place where the raw, unrefined material of your days is being shaped into the capacity for empathy, for resilience, and for a kind of love that is strong enough to include even the parts of you that you've tried to reject. When you feel that heaviness, that dense, slug sluggish feeling of being not enough. Try to notice that the heaviness itself is not the problem. The problem is the judgment that says, I shouldn't be feeling this way. Drop the judgment, and what are you left with? You are left with the sensation of weight. And weight is not an error. It is a property of matter. It is a property of your life. When you can sit with the weight, acknowledging it without wanting to change it, the second wound begins to heal. You aren't doing anything to the emotion, and yet the emotional charge begins to lessen. The tightness in your throat, the knot in your stomach, these are just physical reflections of your resistance. When you yield to the reality of what is currently present, you create a space for the breath to enter, and in that space, there is a release that no amount of forced positivity could ever produce. You have probably spent years trying to polish your life to a high golden sheen, fearing that if anyone saw the soot on your hands, they would know you were an imposter. But what if the soot is the sign of the work? What if the struggle is not the absence of the path, but the path itself? The apprentice Kalen was afraid to be seen with the lead, but the master knew the lead was the key to the apprentice's own stability. You have been carrying your struggle like a burden, but it is actually your foundation. You are allowed to be tired of the performance. You are allowed to be tired of the need to be consistently up, consistently bright, consistently together. The night does not care if your shop is clean. The night only cares if you are warm, and you are warm. Even now, in the middle of your fatigue, there is a core of awareness that is not tired. There is a witness inside you that is not affected by the lead of your day. It is the witness that noticed you were feeling heavy. It is the witness that brought you to this space of rest. That witness is not struggling with the lead. It is not judging the soot. It is simply watching, simply holding, and simply allowing the forge to be what it is. That witness is who you are. The rest, the stories of your failure, the projections of your future, the heavy emotions you've been lugging around, that is just the material. You don't have to clean the material. You just have to learn how to keep the fire lit. If the mind begins to complain, if it says that this is lazy or too simple, or that it won't actually solve your problems, listen to that thought, but don't give it the bellows. It's just another piece of raw ore, another fragment of your history trying to dictate the rhythm of the forge. Acknowledge it, name it, and let it sit in the heat. It doesn't need to be destroyed. It just needs to be seen. You are the fire, you are the warmth, and you are perfectly, profoundly allowed to rest in the middle of your own complexity, without having to refine a single thing before you close your eyes. This wisdom does not belong in a mountain forge, it belongs in the palm of your hand. In the quiet moments where your life feels too loud, too rapid, or too demanding to hold. Consider those times when you are waiting for a digital notification that feels like a judgment on your value, or when you are lying awake while the house is silent, replaying a conversation as if you could manually edit the past into a version of yourself that felt safer. These moments are the true forge work of a human life. When you feel that familiar itch to reach for the metaphorical hammer of control, pause, just for the space of a single, unhurried breath. Notice what is happening. You are not failing to be peaceful. You are simply witnessing the ancient habit of the mind trying to protect you by keeping you in a state of constant, unproductive motion. When you experience the urge to check your screen, to see if you have been validated, or to scan the darkness in hopes of an answer that never comes, recognize that sensation for what it is. It is not a call for more information, it is a call for a moment of internal grounding. You are not broken because you seek connection or reassurance. You are simply human, and your mind has learned a narrow, frantic way of finding security. But you can choose in that small interval to acknowledge the desire without obeying it. You can simply notice, I am feeling the urge to control this outcome, and then let the breath move through you. By not acting on the impulse, you are setting down the heavy hammer. You are showing your mind that you can exist in uncertainty without being consumed by it. Consider the feeling of being behind in life, that persistent, hollow sense that the world has raced ahead while you are still struggling to calibrate your own inner rhythm. That feeling is not a truth, it is a story. It is a story you have woven from comparisons and expectations that were never truly yours to begin with. When that density arises, do not try to argue with it. Do not try to forge a different narrative through sheer force of will. Instead, look at the feeling itself. It is just a thought, a small dark piece of ore in the background of your consciousness. You do not have to follow it. You can acknowledge that it is there. You can see how it makes you feel, and you can let it lie on the workbench, choosing instead to focus on the breath that is moving through you right now. The present moment is the only place where your life is actually unfolding, and it is a place where you are never behind, for you have not yet arrived at the future you are so afraid of missing. Even the simple act of choosing to rest can feel like a betrayal of your responsibilities. You might have noticed that when you finally stop to breathe, your mind immediately tells you that you haven't earned it, or that there is still something left to refine. That voice is not your own. It is the echo of the apprentice who feared the shop would go cold, the part of you that believes productivity is the only measure of worth. Tonight, challenge that belief with the quiet practice of surrender. You do not need to earn your rest. You do not need to keep the forge burning to deserve the silence. You are a living, breathing part of the world, and just like the mountain or the rain, you have a natural cycle that includes the necessity of quiet seasons. To rest is not to abandon your duties. To rest is to trust that the process continues, even when you are not there to witness it. In your relationships, when you feel the urge to manipulate an outcome or to force someone to understand you, remember the master who realized the forge didn't need his constant, desperate striking. We often try to force our loved ones into the patterns we think they should occupy, and in doing so, we strain the very connections we are trying to preserve. Practice the art of listening without the need to correct, the art of being present without the need to direct. When you feel a conflict rising, take that single intentional breath. Let the tension in your hands subside. By loosening your grip on the outcome, you often create the very space that the other person needs to meet you, truly and freely. The strongest connections are not the ones we hold the tightest, they are the ones we allow to breathe. If you are smiling while feeling heavy inside, if you are pretending to be okay because you fear that showing your vulnerability would be a sign of a broken forge, understand that this is the hardest kind of labor there is. You are trying to maintain a surface that contradicts the reality of your heart. You do not need to shout your pain from the rooftops, but you do need to stop denying it to yourself. Admitting to yourself that you are tired is a profound act of honesty. It is the first step toward letting the mechanism sit quiet. You are allowed to be in process. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to be a person who is currently navigating a difficult calibration, without that defining who you are in your entirety. When you are comparing your life to the polished images of others, remember that you are looking at the finished blade, not the heat of the forge. You are seeing the visible result, not the scraps, the failures, the hours spent in doubt, or the times the metal cooled before it was ready. You are looking at their surface, while you are experiencing the depth of your own inner life. It is not a fair comparison, and it is certainly not a kind one. If you must look at others, look at them with the recognition that they too are smiths, stumbling through their own calibrations, carrying their own pieces of lead, and trying their best to find rest in the middle of their own complicated systems. You can be disciplined without being cruel. You can have goals without being consumed by them. The practice of mindfulness is the discipline of returning. Every time you realize you have been swept away by urgency, you are practicing the most important movement of the smith, the return to the present. It doesn't matter how many times you lose your way, how many times you pick up the hammer of anxiety, or how many times you forget that you are the fire and not the iron. The beauty is in the return. It is in the gentle, repeated choice to come back to your breath, to come back to your heart, and to come back to the realization that you are already safe, already whole, and already enough. Think of your life as a place of unfolding, not a contest of speed. You are not here to be judged by the smoothness of your finish, but to experience the act of living itself. When you find yourself wanting to fix a situation, ask yourself, what is the most compassionate thing I can do right now? Often, the answer is not to do more but to do less, to stop pushing, to stop judging, to stop checking the time and simply be. That is not weakness, that is the highest form of strength. The strength of the one who trusts the warmth of their own presence enough to let the transformation unfold. You are moving through your days as a participant, not a slave to the expectations you imagine. When you feel overwhelmed, look for the small, concrete reality that grounds you: the feeling of your feet on the floor, the texture of the bedding, the sound of the rain, the simple, undeniable truth of the air moving in your lungs. These are your anchors. They are not grand or dramatic, but they are real. They are the connections that hold you to the earth while your mind tries to drift into the turbulent sky of the future. You are doing the work, even when it feels like you are doing nothing at all. Every moment you choose to soften, every moment you choose to notice, every moment you choose to trust, that is the work. It is the work of a lifetime, and it is being done perfectly, one breath at a time. The gears of the world will continue to turn, but your heart no longer needs to be the force that drives them. You can be steady, you can be still, and you can be entirely free to finally deeply let go. The iron forge has finally grown quiet, and the pulsating, amber glow of the fire has faded into the soft velvet dark of the mountain night. The jagged pieces of iron that you once held so tightly, fearing they would define you, have lost their biting heat. They rest now, cooled by the gentle evening rain, no longer demanding to be hammered into a shape that fits the expectations of the world. There is a deep, resonant mercy in this cooling, a realization that the forge was never a prison, but a place of transformation where the heavy parts of your heart could finally be acknowledged, accepted, and softened. You have spent your energy, your spirit, and your long days trying to refine the ore of your life into something that would justify your worth. But the night, in its ancient and unhurried wisdom, asks for none of this. The night asks only that you let the fire dim, and that you allow the heavy tools to lie idle on the floor. The crucible is empty, the anvil is still, and you are no longer the one who must strike the iron to prove you are alive. Feel the heavy, grounding weight of your body as it settles deeper into the dark, quiet embrace of your bed. It is as if you are the forge itself, no longer burdened by the need to hold the heat or monitor the temperature of your own experience. The frantic rhythm of your attention is cooling, layer by layer, ember by ember. The thoughts that once felt like sharp, unrefined metal, demanding your constant, exhausting intervention, are now merely soft, dark shapes drifting through the moonlight. You do not need to assemble them. You do not need to polish them until they shine. You are being held by the same stillness that holds the silent stone walls of the mountainside, and you are free to sink into the gentle, cooling tide of sleep. Every breath is a reminder that you are part of a rhythm that is far older and far more resilient than your own mental labor. The inhale carries the cool, damp scent of the mountain evening, and the exhale releases the last, lingering traces of the soot and the struggle. Notice the space where the breath turns, the soft, dark pause between the coming and the going. In that narrow, quiet interval, there is no hammer, there is no fire. There is only the presence of being clear, unformed, and entirely at rest. You can drift here, you can hover in this space, untethered from the need to forge, to measure, or to resolve. The questions of tomorrow will reveal themselves when they are ready, and they will be met with the same warmth that is flowing through your chest right now. You do not have to prepare for them in the dark. The stone chamber of your mind is dim, cool, and filled with the quiet, protective shadows of the night. The heavy iron door is unlatched, and the wind outside continues its ancient, wandering song, moving through the pines of the valley floor. And you are no longer trying to catch that wind or force it into the forge. You are simply a witness to the night. Your hands are open, relaxed, and empty of the tools of your appraisal. The muscles in your shoulders, your chest, and your jaw have finally yielded to the gravity of the earth. Everything that felt so heavy, so essential to hold on to, is drifting away, leaving you light, leaving you soft, leaving you ready for the deep, restorative quiet that is waiting to welcome you home. There is no need to refine the past. There is no need to look at your history to see if it is good enough. Your responsibility for the day has reached its natural, quiet conclusion. You have walked the mountain. You have held the heat, and you have finally learned the grace of letting the iron settle. The life you have been living is already being held by the vast, turning reality of the universe. You are not the smith of your own fate. You are the one who is being cradled by the rhythm of the stars. As the last embers of your mental effort fade, let your awareness become as soft and as fluid as the shadows stretching across the floor. The room is dissolving into the stillness. The remnants of the forge are fading into the rhythmic, steady pulse of your own heart. You are not falling into a void, you are returning to the source of the fire, the deep, silent ground from which all transformation emerges, and to which it all eventually returns. You are safe in this descent. You are supported by the very life that beats in your chest, the same life that invites you, with absolute kindness, to finally let go of the need to fix yourself. The mountainside is silent, the forge is at rest, and you, after so many days of constant taxing labor, are finally allowed to exist without an objective. The night does not demand that you be gold. It only offers rest. It only offers the infinite, cool embrace of the dark, where you are not required to be anything, where you are not required to be anywhere, and where the frantic story you have been telling yourself, the one about needing to strike, needing to shape, and needing to be better, finally reaches its quiet, beautiful end. There is no more heat. There is no more soot. There is only the soft, endless unfolding of a life that is already held, already whole, and already at peace in the heart of the great, quiet night. What if the gold you were trying to forge was never a finished product you had to create, but the very warmth that remained once you finally stopped fearing the lead?